Many there are who have never heard of the Atman, the great self within. Many others, though they hear of it, fail to comprehend it. Fortunate is that one who hears of it. Wonderful is that one who speaks of it. And extremely blessed is that one who, having heard of it from the lips of an illumined preceptor, is able to realize it here and now, in this very lifetime, in this very body. Om, peace, peace, peace. May that Brahman protect us, may it sustain us, and may it illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, and peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. This week's meeting on the internet, which is one of the ways in which we have to conduct ourselves these days. So many people traveling randomly, and so many others staying home and hunkering down. That's true quite a lot with the devotees, when they get a chance to be in peace and quiet and look within to the Atman, as we were just describing in that beautiful chant. So this week's gathering, I'm pleased to see a lot of people on hand so that we can go into these wonderful teachings of the Dharma around the holy days of December and January that we've been benefiting by so much. Certainly one of the most important goddesses is on Thursday, is Sarasvati, goddess of arts and learning. And SRV Associations has a very deep connection and relationship with arts and music, and are appreciators of that in a sacred way, sacred music or divine music, offering all sound and studying these powerful teachings of the word, which in its ultimate state is, of course, one with the Lord. In the beginning was the Word, and it was with God, and it was God. And then as it turns into phases, as the Indians taught from Mother India taught us that the word trickles down in 4 phases, that you can then study these phases and know how manifestation occurs, not just of the tattvas, which is the Kapila, Lord Kapila system that we look at very closely, but also in terms of the beings who man the tattvas, that is consciousness and how it gets into forms, and how that's all falls in the province of the enlightened, as Gaudapada called it, all through words, starting out as thoughts. So that you have a great soul like Sri Krishna, as we just saw from some of the posts that have come out on our website, that Sri Krishna just looked out from a very high state of mind and saw everything as a manifestation of thought. And Holy Mother used to even say that all objects are just thoughts made concretized. And science has followed along in that vein in its own gradual and slow way, and found out that, yes, everything is vibration. And somehow there's a sleight of hand in there that takes thoughts and turns it into solid objects, or takes the word and makes it vibrate slower and slower and slower until finally the fineness of it is all gone and people are in an ordinary state of mind, and they see their thoughts turn into objects. And they see this happen from their waking into their dreaming, into their deep sleep state, and back to waking inside of a 24-hour cycle, but still have a hard time recovering that philosophical teaching that we get about the manifestation of the word, like in its fourth stage, which we're seeing with our outer senses right now. That's the path of Shabda Brahma, the path of Nada Brahma, and that's Anahata, that's Om, that's all these wonderful teachings that we have available to us with which to make sense out of the entire expression of, and turn it into an expression of divinity. Or if we're confused, trace our way back to the source, and each day contemplate upon the word and its manifestations and how vibration comes and goes. That would all be and fall under the auspice of the goddess Sarasvati as far as a teaching that clarifies. So her birthday's on Thursday. Last week we had Swami Vivekananda's birthday and had beautiful teachings, and here in Hawaii inaugurated this new location we're in, which you're seeing me in right now, and all the beautiful peace that's here around us. Somebody told me the other day, it's so noisy down here. I wake up and there's machines going already early in the morning everywhere out there. But up here, we're far away from all of that din and enjoying the peace very much and using it to reflect and meditate deep within upon the Atman. And I know all of you have probably been doing that, taking time out of your active lives and going inactive. Like sometimes we turn on the cameras and we say in humorous mock, I say, lights, camera, in action. So we're going kind of a different way than Hollywood is. We want to turn everything off and then notice the witness that's looking upon all that. Lack of action, lack of movement, lack of thought, loss of self, ego self. It all begins to turn into a different direction towards this disappearance of vibration. And as you do that, you're working your way back towards that primal level of the word, which is called para, or supreme station, where everything is gone but you. And then you finally are able to see this true self that we're talking about. Some have never heard of it, others have heard of it, but have failed to comprehend it. Sri Ramakrishna took that sloka out of the Upanishads and replaced Atman with milk, so that people would begin to get the idea of how he saw God and everything, just naturally. In fact, naturally, but very matter-of-factly seeing Brahman and everything, or Atman and everything. And so he would say that some had never heard of milk in some far-off country or some place where high elevation, where animals were not available to humanity. Some have never heard of milk. Some have heard of it, never tasted it. And some of them have actually gotten a taste of it and can describe it to others. And then in the case of himself, we add in, he owned the whole dairy of the world. He saw it everywhere, that inner essence that was permeating everything. So the Atman, just to make sure that we don't run afoul or step on any toes of other people who don't really like the idea of a self. We make sure and describe the self as being all pervasive and indivisible. So it's there shooting through and through everything, like sugar and in sugarcane juice, like sweetness and everything. And then it can't be divided or lessened or heightened. And then you get the idea of a self that's all pervasive rather than broken into parts or scattered, as so many minds are, into a fragmented state. How do you expect to see cohesive unity in everything when your mind is scattered? It doesn't, of course, follow. So then looking from that philosophically clarified position, then you get the peace of mind that you've always been seeking. But it has to, you have to take that inward turn in this day and age first and calm everything down, quiet it down, and understand that vibrations are under your control, that the word is there for you, and meditate upon that Om in the innermost chamber of the heart. Krishna has that beautiful instruction in the meditation chapter, Dhyan Yoga, in the Bhagavad Gita, and then all through the ages, we found that teaching emerging of how to connect with yourself. If not every day, which great lovers of reality would prefer to do, at least at the end of your life. It's the way Krishna puts it in the Gita. That soul that's comes to know in advance, if they're that fortunate to know about their oncoming demise or leaving of the body. If they come to know about that, maybe disease would be one sign, or maybe you get some premonition, or whatever the case. Or maybe if you're more conscious, you decide enough of this. And then you sit yourself down in that cross-legged position, which is so indicative to raising the Kundalini goddess. And then you concentrate your energy in the third eye and your concentration, your love in the heart on the Ishtam that you have followed all your life. And you control the breath, watch it, the inhaled and outward breaths, Paraka, Kumbhaka, Rejaka. And you utter the monosyllabled Om, and you think of nothing but me. And that's the way the yogi or the yogini leaves the body consciously. And he puts it in terms of at the time of death. And of course, those beings who are more in love with divine reality and want to see it everywhere and feel it at all times, I think that's meditation, it's called. And you just do that. You have such control of all those functions and all those disciplines that I just mentioned, because each one, watching the breath and controlling the senses and focusing on the heart, each one of those is a particular discipline that you master and then put all together into one great practice, which nets you this realization of Brahman and many, many insights and revelations on the way. I wonder if you can share those insights and revelations you've had from the least and most seemingly insignificant, because some of those are just straws that bring down the house of cards around you, to any great ones you've had, or even read about the great experiences that the seers had and have recorded in the scriptures. And then we'll make this satsang more participatory, now that I've warmed you up with some of the reminders from our tradition, particularly the birthdays, the holy days, and the word. Who can come forward and share something this week?
Namaste, Babaji. I was reading about the differences between the religion of the world and the religion of God, which in this book was meaning conventional religion and religion that is not conventional. And I would like I was wondering if you could talk about those differences. What is those differences, and how can we transition from a worldly religion to a more spiritual one? If you could comment about that.
I've put it in several ways as I've looked at it, and I've heard our founder Lex Sixon also talk about it, because he was so much more a master of different religious influences and traditions that he studied and interviewed people from different religions, as you know, in the Spirit series that are all on some many collection of many recordings that you can download and listen to. Basically, the difference between conventional religion, mundane human convention, was how he put it. But he noticed that in people, and he got on the radio and then interviewed anyone he could get in there from different religions. There were plenty of Jewish people in New York that he was friendly with. There were, every time a holy person came in from the Far East or Middle East, he would be on the hand there. He was frequenting Vedanta Center and then Buddhist centers, and had personal relations with Tibetan Buddhists like the Dalai Lama and Karmapa. And so he was constantly interviewing people who were practitioners or masters, teachers in those religions, yet nonetheless came out with this expression, mundane human convention. So we could probably put it in terms of the chant we started out with today, that some have never heard of the Atman, some, though they hear of it, fail to comprehend it. I think probably you could use that to say that those people who have heard of it and fail to comprehend it, and those are people who are in conventional religion. You don't see them having blissful experiences or deep non-dual realizations, or writing scriptures, or great, leaving behind great record of great experiences that they had. They just go to church once a week kind of thing, or go to the temple and do a puja once in a while, or whatever practices that beings in these different religions do. In the case of India, he saw that Brahmin priests were doing rituals every day, but he noticed that their minds were not very high. You'd think that if you were doing ritual every day to gods and goddesses, like these holy days that we're observing when they come around, that there would be a great transformation happen to you if you were constantly doing that. But Brahmin priests were doing it as a convention. It's part of how they make their money. So there's one strike against a pure religious outlook, and then the ritual itself was calling forth all the attention, rather than the one that you're doing the ritual to. We have it on good record that when Sri Ramakrishna went to worship Mother Kali, because he was a Brahmin priest at that time, and he went into the Kali temple, that when he started to offer flowers to her or say mantras and so forth, he would weep and cry. And this just didn't happen once in a while. He couldn't lay his eyes on that image of Mother Kali decorated so beautifully every day, and with him being the one who's doing the decorating and the worshiping, without going into deep and intense spiritual moods. So that's what we started off saying, that that's just a very natural thing. If you see God in everything, that's just waking up with God in your mind, falling asleep with God in your mind. Conventional religious people probably are not doing that. They're falling asleep with money on their minds and waking up with work, going to work on their minds. And then if you're a householder and not a Brahmin priest, then you have to earn your money, so you have to do it dharmically. So Dharma itself would be one way to keep your mind on Brahman as you go through the workaday world. That every act that came along, everything you had to do, every paper you had to write as your student, every action you had to do at the workplace, it would always be couched in this question: am I doing this dharmically, or am I doing this consciously? So it becomes less of a practice then and more of an observance. So that takes you out of the common run of conventional religion, because your mind and thoughts are always upon God. Place your mind on thoughts of reality alone, the Upanishads tell us. But of course, that's not possible to do when you work. It's only possible to keep it as an underlying ideal. That's where you have to be able to hold two ideals at once, the world and God both, if you're a householder. Sri Krishna used to say that if the hunchback is there with everyone watching the wedding procession will go by, everyone stops and gawks. It's just great spectacle. But all of them get to watch it go by without a weight on their back, but he's got this carbuncle on his back, and he has to bear that all the time. So it's one of his ways of saying that the householder has this big weight on the back. He can't really enjoy the vision of God all the time, which is like the wedding processional going by, because of all these responsibilities that they're shouldering. And in this day and age, that makes a lot of sense, just because it is so heavy with work. So how to wake ourselves up to better ways of dealing with that is what we want to do. So if you have the wherewithal to rise up and out of the mundane human conventional religion that's around, and then you would probably use Dharma as your leverage, to put yourself in a new position each day, to be a practitioner or a devotee or a seeker or an aspirant, doing sadhana or spiritual self-effort. All of those things then all of a sudden come to the fore. And that's your posture. So your mental posture, sometimes I like to say, is that just saves you from mundane human convention. But probably what else saves you is that you were thoroughly bored with that when you were in it, and you thought that there must be something much better than this, that God must be a living, breathing entity. It must be not just a matter of whether it exists or not, but that it's everywhere in existence. It is existence. And so what's in the way of my seeing it that way and experiencing that way? And so then you might say that the form of that's come to us in the West is the mantra. That's the practice that we've been given by people who are more advanced in their religious disciplines and are more realized and have had some great success in detaching themselves from the world because they had an ideal called renunciation. And renunciation doesn't fit well with materialism. And it doesn't fit well with attachment to objects and with the hoarding and the selfish greediness, selfish grasping, our founder used to say, that seems to be a part of people who occupy those common runs of conventional religion. So I would say from conventional religion, you go to traditional religion. That's how we saw Lex Hickson, our founder, leading us. You go to tradition. So he would stumble upon people or come upon people who were of all different walks of life in America, and listening to his radio show and so forth. But and they were of the opinion that they were free because they had quit conventional religion. But he knew they weren't free because they hadn't come to understand true religion yet. So Vivekananda used to say that, we cannot get rid of the Bible. We cannot get rid of the Quran. We cannot get rid of the Bhagavad Gita and throw them away and expect to arrive at true religion. We have to read them all and then put them down. So that's traditional religion there, where you pick a path and a religion, you study it deeply, you dig one deep well until you strike water. And then the water in your well is in the same as other wells. That is, that your religion's essence is the same as other essences of other religions around the world. And that will put an end to all this fighting and war, and also put an end to jealousy and backstabbing, and people will be able to practice this harmony of all religions that Sri Ramakrishna then represents, which would be the next tier of that. So beyond convention to tradition, and then transcend tradition to via practice to this realization of the harmony of all religions, and then even go beyond that and realize in non-dual samadhi the unity, the natural unity of all religions. So step by step, stage by stage, avasta by avasta, one would extract oneself out of this lower habit that the world has of just turning their religion worldly, and get serious about traditions, one's own particularly, and then about all others too. So it is a natural way of proceeding, and some beings have come upon it and have exemplified it for us. Sri Ramakrishna at the highest level, and Swami Vivekananda as a world teacher, and Lex Hixon is our own example here in the West, did that, and a really amazing thing. In each country, somebody will have to come forward and open the dikes, let that water of free, so that it will wash over the humanity, that particular culture, and bring with it this refreshing draught of true religion. That will get rid of irreligion, Vivekananda said, because he found in his own country and here in the conventional Christianity, he found irreligion. A great world teacher like that moves about the world and observes this, and is not just criticizing your religion and making his superior, but he's also criticizing the religious state of his own country. Then we probably should sit up and take a look at a great soul like that and take his advice, practice it, and realize the truth. Thou shalt know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. There's nothing in there about race or color or creed or religion. It's just the truth. People have gotten free by that truth, by the thousands, but many more prefer to suffer inside of that narrow constriction called convention. The world of narrow convention will never know love. So true love belongs only to those lovers of divine reality who go seeking the Lord and the Mother, and best sought inside oneself. Outside for a while, possibly, but inside. Kingdom of heaven is within you. Who else has something? Yes, Chaitanya Jyoti. Please refresh us with your intelligent light.
Mm-hmm. Namaste, Babaji. Namaste, everyone. Yeah, I have kind of a question or kind of just looking for you to comment on some of Swamiji's words from his Raja Yoga lecture. And it's in the line of how you introduced Satsang today with objects being thought made manifest or thought concretized. And there's just a couple sections I want to read. The first one I kind of can grasp a little easier. It's from concentration in its practice section. He says, the drawing in of the organs is by their giving up their own objects and taking the form of the mind stuff, as it were. The organs are separate states of the mind stuff. I see the book. The form is not in the book. It is in the mind. Something is outside which calls that form up. The real form is in the chitta. The organs identify themselves with and take the forms of whatever comes to them. If you can restrain the mind stuff from taking these forms, the mind will remain calm. This is called pratyahara. And then earlier in the section, which is titled Concentration, Its Spiritual Uses, he uses the object book again. And this one, I was wondering maybe if you could comment on more too. It was a little harder for me to grasp right away. But he says, take this book as a book. It does not exist outside. What exists outside is unknown and unknowable. The unknowable furnishes the suggestion that gives a blow to the mind, and the mind gives out the reaction in the form of a book. In the same manner as when a stone is thrown into the water is thrown against it in the form of waves. The real universe is the occasion of the reaction of the mind. And it kind of goes on there, but that kind of part caused me to stop and was wondering if you might be able to comment on it and shed a little more light. I understand the kind of the essence of it, but it was a little, it took me back a little bit. So thank you.
Yes, these are what are called the dynamics of perception. And you have them again at that conventional level called lower wisdom or aparavidya. People in the world and intellectuals in different cultures, and in America, maybe one of the higher and better things about the culture is that it's this intellectual acumen, but it's all been for the sake of outer objects and outer powers and accumulation of materials and so forth. So it can only go so far. But when you have a yogi like Swami Vivekananda putting his mind on the dynamics of perception in total detachment and renunciation of those very things I just mentioned that Americans are seeking so much and people in the world now overall are seeking, that a soul like that can just put all of that aside with a sweep of the hand and focus on the matter-of-fact dynamics of the eyes, putting the senses, putting the pranic energy upon a certain object that had been created from a formless state and had assumed a form through that process, then you've got a person that's worthy of listening to, you see, because that detachment puts him in a much more serious position to be a knower of all those processes and to also transcend them at the drop of a hat, as we used to say. So I would have just preferred to listen to you read for hours of what he said rather than have me comment on it, because that's the kind of thing that, you get thirsty for or hungry for. If everything else in the world doesn't satisfy you anymore, those thoughts, those high thoughts around what happens to, that's why we study the Samkhya, so what happens from the Purusha all the way down to the element earth are what grabs the attention of a person who loves God. And it's just not who loves philosophy, because you can get into it just for the philosophy, but there you're running that risk of leaning back towards loving the thing for the sake of itself rather than for the sake of the self. And you lose track of the observer in that process. But to To get pleasure, they do that, but to get exquisite pleasure, you keep track of the observer, and then you're not a participant anymore in what raises the risk of suffering, because we know the world consists of suffering. Everyone from Kapila down to Lord Buddha and onward has said that that's the first law of everything here. And if you don't cognize that and admit it, and then use it as a way of protecting yourself, then you run that risk of falling into Maya. And then, as we were just saying, at the end of your life, how can you practice that detachment? Those 7 or 8 things that I said that Sri Krishna said in the Gita is how just to sit, control the breath, draw in the senses. By the way, like a turtle does its limbs, he says, when you're starting to read that, if you draw your senses back from the objects, and you're doing that so that you're escaping the risk of being attached or of engaging in pleasure that ends or leads next to pain and then back to pleasure, and getting involved in the Mayic process devoid of the ability to observe the dynamics of perception from a witness state, then that's much like if there's danger outside, the turtle will just draw its limbs in its shell and it's fully protected there. So that's how Krishna talks about sense control. And we know it's also a big part of yoga in terms of Patanjali's 8-limb system. But it's more like prerequisites to real practice. It's just like, if you have to do this, drawing the senses away from objects, and it's hard, then you know that's how far gone you are, how deluded you've been in past lifetimes. So isn't that back to some have never heard of the Atman, some have heard of it but can't cognize it, because there's a whole mass of us here in the West, who from past lifetimes were attached to materials, and we were involved in conventional religion, and that didn't help. And we're just coming back again in the same form with the same mindsets, or different forms physically and with the same mindset. But that soul who qualifies itself and then extracts itself from that process remembers that at the end of its life and goes into a conscious death. And everyone in Tibetan Buddhism now has been teaching that for hundreds of years. And that's recently come to us. Lex Ixon, our founder, was on the scene when that came and was interviewing Tibetans on the radio in New York to find out what they had been practicing for the last 700 years, or 1400 years really, because around 700 AD is when those teachings came from India to Tibet. So all of that to say then that this dynamics of perception is a fundamental practice. It's Yoga 101. In Vivekananda, who's describing it so perfectly, he doesn't have to do that anymore. He's just showing you how to do it by giving you such a clear explanation of how it's done. And somehow he made it happen in English too. He knows it in Sanskrit and in Bengali and so forth, but which is like 60% Sanskrit still, Bengali. So if you can render that deep feeling of the dynamics of perception into English for people, and then pretty soon have them getting the idea of how to withdraw from objects, and very soon see that there's a witness that's at the foundation of everything that you're withdrawing them to, then how could you not come up with the conclusion that objects are just the mind's thoughts? And then how could you not jump from that conclusion and go to the fact that, oh, I see, God did not create the worlds, I did. And this is the kind of thinking that leads you back towards a transcendental, formless, all-pervasive, indivisible Brahman, or Allah, or Almighty Father. And that would then lead you on to universality, wouldn't it? So in whatever level you're getting into this run of human consciousness as a flow, if you want to take all the cultures as rivers and say, you know, Yata Nadyaha Shandamanha Samudre Asham Gachanti Namarupa Vihaya. Namarupa, this name and form, may we take that and we just bring it back as a river flowing back to its source. May we always never be like mighty rivers flowing into the sea, losing all sense of name and form and identity into the ocean of absolute reality. And so if you were to ask Swami Vivekananda about that, and this happened to one student once, he said, well, how do I get free? He said, take everything that you're brooding about, everything you're worrying about, everything that is an obstacle or an impediment to the freedom that your heart is seeking. Take all those things, put them in a bag, go to the nearest river and throw them in. And so he made it sound very simple how to get rid of all these weights that we carry around with us that we don't need to be carrying. And anyway, what you just wrote, what you just read, thank you for that, very beautiful, is how a great yogi or a great Mahayogi, in that case, would describe to us children, would describe to children on the path how they reached this witness consciousness or this transcendental position, which, when seen, is filled with bliss. It's not something that's just a matter of fact or boring. You see, you didn't give up one boring thing just to take on another boring thing. You gave up the world, which is really boring in the end and unreal and insubstantial and ever-changing and transitory and ephemeral. Shall I go on with more words that they all say about it? Birds have nests, foxes have holes in it, but you don't have any place there. So you gave all that up, you renounced it, and you didn't find that you went to the next state of boredom. You went to the next state of freedom. And that attracted you and it enhanced your spiritual practice and it inspired you to go on to Gatam, Paragatam, beyond all goals to the supreme goal that Lord Buddha talked about.
Thank you, Babaji.
Welcome. We've been making great use of our 45 or so minutes. Is how to make an hour go by quickly? Just get into satsang with Guru and Sangha, and whole evenings will pass. Like in King Dasaratha's court, it start talking about God between the priests and the people and the workers and the kings and the royalty. They'd all be in the king's court to do that specifically, and the sun would just be setting, and then they'd talk, and then before they knew it, the sun was rising on the other side of the palace walls. They'd spent the whole night talking about Brahman, talking about divine reality, and hadn't even known that time was passing. That's how the world goes away when you get close to Brahman, as Sri Krishna said. But if you have a lots of responsibilities and people to take care of, you might not want to go quite that far yet. Matur Babu came running up Sri Krishna pleading to have the samadhi that he had. And Sri Krishna spoke to Divine Mother about it, and she gave him a little bit of it. And Matur Babu was not seen for several days. And when he was seen, the whole temple was in disrepair. People were not getting their food. holy men were not getting dispensation of robes and cloths and various things that they got from the temple for free. And Mater Baba was red-eyed and hair tousled, clothes unkempt. Take this away, Master. I don't want it anymore. Take this away. Beautiful story in our tradition. So that's why we have this middle ground, this middle path. And that's why there are such a things as ecstatics and monks and householders and vanaprastans, somewhere in between there, people who live in the world now, and they are able to walk the rice balk, across, see both sides, see the world and see Brahman, and keep a balance between them, and therefore enrich themselves spiritually with all the experiences of the world, and not fall into mundane human convention otherwise. In 10 minutes or less, we can have time for another question, reading, insight.
I don't have a question today, Babaji, but I did want to say that I brought along Swami Nikhilananda's first volume of the Upanishads with me to read and study, and I've been finding powerful wisdom and explication in the opening discussion. It's like the first almost third of it, I think. It's quite a bit of that book. And it's been just giving me a lot to reflect on and meditate on, and I'm grateful for it.
Wonderful. Yes, I'm sure we have all the volumes. Originally, I think that was in 4 volumes. And some of the Upanishads are contained, the smaller ones are contained in 1 volume, and then you've got Upanishads like the Chandogya and so forth, which would take up a whole volume themselves. And there are other Swamis who actually commented on the Upanishads, because, Upanishad is Vedanta. If we're talking about Veda, Anta, at the end of the Vedas, Anta were these Upanishads. So I'm so glad to hear that people are still immersing themselves in Upanishads, because that's really, I'd say the Gita is more appealing because it's wetter with devotion, but the Upanishads are really the scripture for the Vedantas to cut through so many levels of ignorance and false thinking and confusion and so forth, and be able to go straight to the truth. And Swami Nikhilananda was, of course, our teacher's guru. Our founder's guru, Lex Dixon, was there in the New York Vedanta Society with him. And Swami Nikhilananda used to bounce Lex's children on his knee at the house where I used to attend and meditate with Lex, right there in the Hudson River. And he's very good at, and what you said is very pertinent and true there, is that he'll say, oh, here's Atma Bodha, I want to read Shankara. You don't get to Shankara until 3/4 of the way through the book. The first 3/4 are just all this qualification that he's trying to give the Westerner so that they might be able to understand better Shankara's Atma Bodha. And so it really falls along the line that SRV has been directed toward, is to qualify ourselves to hear the truth and be rather elated. It's like those people who hear of the Atman but can never comprehend it, as we just chanted. We really want to be able to comprehend it and know the Atman as our true self, not just hear about it. That's why we've got Shravana and then Manana and then Nididhyasana, those 3 great proofs of truth behind us in our tradition. They won't let you just read it and walk away inspired, as nice as that is and all. It doesn't somehow stamp out those vestiges of ignorance which still persist in us, which we find have brought us back to another incarnation when we wake up, hopefully, if we do, in the next lifetime. You really have to run these good habits into the mind, because these bad habits aren't going away so easily, not in this Kali Yuga anyway. So if you have a Sangha like we have right now, I'm looking at a dozen people on the screen, and we're all very closely connected, and some of us have been that way for decades. That's the beginnings of divine memory, and that's why we're recognizing each other and coming together. It's not happenstance or coincidence, man, or even deja vu or something, that it's the real thing that is the thread that's running through everything. It's that divine mother essence that we focus on, and in that we qualify ourselves, and each lifetime then leads us more and more towards that final realization, so that we too can then, if we come back in another incarnation, can come back explaining things as beautifully as Swami Vivekananda did, and that Swami Nikhilananda is doing in those Upanisads for us. So Danurgrahitva Upanishadam Hastram Sharam Upasanashita Sanjayita Ayamya Tad Bhavakatena Chetasha Laksham Tadevaksharam Somya Vidhi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Taking as weapon that mighty bow furnished by the Upanishads and other great teachings of Mother India, fasten to it the arrow of mind, made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone. Then drawing full strength, O student, take aim, release, and penetrate that mark, the eternal Brahman. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Thank you all for your kind attentions, and I will see you, or some of you probably, at God Blogs in about an hour. Jai Shri Guru.